Good Vibrations is one of the most sublime pieces of music in pop history. This is Brian Wilson's Rhapsody in Blue, Phil Spector style. Brian Wilson called Good Vibrations a summation of musical vision and harmonic convergence, a blend of talent, production value, songcraft, and spirituality. This mosaic of sound, which was described as a flowery poem by Mike Love, cost about $50,000 to make and involved 90 hours of studio time. However, it did turn around the success of Pet Sounds. Of course, Good Vibrations was recorded or thrashed out during the sessions for Pet Sounds. Can you imagine how brilliant that album would have been had Good Vibrations been on that record instead of, say, Sloop John B? Not taking anything away from Sloop John B, it's a fabulous number, but it is a reworking of an old sea shanty called the John B. Sails. And the Kingston Trio version, which of course predates the Beach Boys version, was called the Wreck of the John B.
We come on the sloop John B, my grandfather and me.
The Beach Boys changed the title to Sloop John B, which was exactly the same name of the version that Dick Dale had done. Now that's an interesting version.
I sailed on the sloop John B, my grandfather and me.
Good Vibrations was a subversion of the pop music formula, an interesting harmonic journey in 6 parts. Musicologists have broken down the structure of the song as such: verse, refrain, first episodic digression, second episodic digression, retro refrain, coda, and cutaway. Mike Love very much wrote the lyrics to give it that Summer of Love vibe. It certainly has a Scott McKenzie feel to it. A piece of impressionistic psychedelia contained in the voices, the lyrics, and that eerie theremin sound. Brian Wilson wanted to beaver away at a composition that would be as remarkable as Rhapsody in Blue, but with a Phil Spector twist to it. But no less viewed through the obscuring fog of numerous substances. Brian Wilson said, "I learned to function behind the drugs." Of course, Brian Wilson was full at work with the rather ill-fated Smile project. Its working title was Dumb Angel. It was a collection of equally ambitious numbers as we got on Pet Sounds, but slightly more bizarre, I think. And interestingly, as regards Good Vibrations, it was Dennis Wilson that was supposed to sing the lead vocal. He was quite ill at the time, so it fell to Carl Wilson to step in. And that breathy exhalation which opens the number feels very much like the quintessential vibration of humanity, which resonates throughout this number.
I love the colorful clothes she wears.
However, the idea of lovers communicating on some non-verbal plane fitted very much into the idea or the themes explored on Pet Sounds. Brian Wilson continued working on the piece called Good Vibrations. It was actually Tony Asher that sketched out some lyrics for the initial composition. And the lyrics were, "It's weird how she comes in so strong, and I wonder what she's picking up from me. I hope it's good, 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 good vibrations." The song was actually considered for Pet Sounds. They started to record it on the 17th of February 1966 at Gold Star Studio. And he began building that wall of sound involving harpsichord, tack piano, flutes, clarinets, cello, Jew's harp, electric fuzz bass, stand-up bass, bass harmonica, chromatic harmonica, organ, and the usual accompaniment of percussive instruments. That certainly gives it that spectre-ish vibe, that aural majesty, a kind of fugue with a rhythmic beat. The defining moment came when the electric theremin, whose high ghostly wail he'd first added to the I Wasn't Made for These Times sessions 3 days earlier, was actually employed. It evoked the vibrations zooming around on the psychic plane. The theremin not only soars in this number, it soars above it, but it also plays this central melodic hook that actually lashes the chorus brilliantly to the verse. As regards the question, why was Good Vibrations left off Pet Sounds? Well, Brian Wilson felt that this song didn't fit in with the moodier, more maudlin introspection that atmospherically shaped that album. Interestingly, he not only put it aside, he actually contemplated giving it away to a soul singer such as Wilson Pickett or Danny Hutton. This was Brian Wilson's little pocket symphony that wandered way beyond all those pop boundaries. As Peter Ames Carlin says in his book, it would be built from parts whose distinctive rhythms, moods and sounds would flow together to form a larger, cohesive piece. To enhance the song's modular feel, he recorded different sections in different studios. It was an intricate process in the pre-digital, pre-64-track age, stretching to 22 recording sessions that took place in 4 studios over the course of 7 months. However, the song's avant-garde structure and length were a real bone of contention at the time, many arguing that it was way too long. As Brian Wilson records in an interview from 1976, he says there was a lot of, "Oh, you can't do that, it's too modern," or "That's going to be too long a record." I said, however, "No, it's not going to be too long a record, it's going to be just right." So overwhelmed with the composition of Good Vibrations, Brian Wilson would often walk out of the studio sessions, effectively sending home dozens of Los Angeles' most expensive studio players without getting so much as a note from them. My word, that must have pleased the record company. He also took a 6-week break, leaving the piece, well, literally in pieces, and his band and family and corporate chiefs fluctuating between befuddlement and outrage. Not many Good Vibrations there then. Pet Sounds, of course, would follow the modular approach employed for Good Vibrations. Brian Wilson would describe this as spiritual music, a teenage symphony to God. With copious amounts of inspiration, perspiration, and amphetamines, of course, he would work his way into that inner space, or plane in his own mind, where the melodies would meet him. He often said that he would see small figures moving through the air above him. These ghostly notes seemed angelic to him. Like Blake observing angels in the sky, Wilson considered them heavenly beings that were delivering the music to him. Brian began calling the album Dumb Angel, which of course would emerge into the Smile sessions. He said something similar to the composition of California Girls. He said he saw the notes forming above the piano as he was writing it. Visionary musical genius, or perhaps someone who took way too much LSD. In Brian's defence, this music has a grandeur and a beauty to it. It doesn't just descend into this formless blob that a lot of lysergic-inspired numbers did. Despite the possibilities afforded him by the imbibing of such substances, Brian Wilson was still very much married to the idea of musical form, structure, and understood the principles of melody and emotion being an important aspect of a composition. And it has to be said that Tony Asher certainly anchored Pet Sounds with a kind of lyrical sensitivity. But for now, the music for what would become Smile was becoming wilder, more free-form, and the lyrics would also drift into a kind of a floaty Fruit Loopery, really. The producer Van Dyke Parks was actually suggested, he'd actually coined a song called High Coin for Harper's Bazaar, with various punning lyrics.
In the high scenes, baby, I'm living in.
Parks was certainly familiar with the music of the Beach Boys. In fact, Dave Crosby had brought up to Laurel Canyon for him to listen to an early acetate of Sloop John B. Brian first suggested that Parks finish off the still incomplete lyrics to Good Vibrations. However, it was Mike Love who wrote most of the new verses in his car on the way to the recording studio. These vocal sessions were not easy to record. In fact, took almost a month to do, with Brian monitoring every tonal and spiritual nuance of every note sung. And of course, even these would be double-tracked by every member, involving more and more work. When Brian made his final mix, he said, "I felt like the skies had opened up." It was a feeling of beauty, a feeling of power, he told Rolling Stone magazine in 1976. Its interweaving moods and rhythms veering from the delicate to the hymnal, flute-filled opening verses to the wailing cello and theremin chorus and the honky-tonk piano first bridge to the echoing church-like organ on the second bridge, all supported by the beautiful vocal harmonies and soaring falsettos. Of course, it rocketed to the top of the Billboard chart, selling about 40,000 copies in the first 4 days. It began to summarise a feeling that was very much building in youth culture in the mid-1960s. in the same way that Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone had a catalytic, apocalyptic presence amid the milieu of popular protest. Its sneer and surreal images were something else, that chrome horse, the Siamese cat wearing a diplomat, the sad Napoleon in rags, the assassin's blade in the line, "You're invisible now." This was all transformed into the vocabulary of popular music. All this to a backdrop of slashing guitars and wailing organ. In the words of Grail Marcus, it became a generational cry of frustration and a statement of purpose. However, the hymnal and crystalline Good Vibrations stood on the same ground but pointing blithely in the opposite direction. To quote one critic, "Where Dylan's voice was tart and piercingly intelligent, the Beach Boys were sweet and boyish. Where his music was visceral and rough, Brian's was sophisticated and honed to a high shine." And while it was the Minnesota poet's wild psychedelic language that would transform the culture, it was the California studio whizz's equally wild, equally psychedelic music that sounded like a vision of the future. There's no doubt in my mind that Good Vibrations was one of the most important pieces of pop music ever recorded. But rather than just these candy-striped tools of sonic consumerism, the Beach Boys began to represent or embody a kind of sonic revolution. Certainly in terms of what pop music could and should be. Brian Wilson finally had his Rhapsody in Blue. Anyway, you've been watching a video of a classic album review. Please do click like, subscribe and check that notification bell. Other than that, I'll leave you with my closing salvo, which is hope you're well, staying safe, and of course that you keep listening.